Before we get stuck into actually building our web app, I just want to have a quick look at what we call CSS frameworks. Now, we could go ahead and design our website from scratch, writing every single line of CSS code that is required. There's some very clever and very design-oriented people out there that have actually come together and designed these kind of frameworks or pre-built kind of blocks of CSS code that we can then use to design our apps and to use in our applications. So this one here, this is called Bulma, and basically it's a framework and a bunch of CSS that just makes it really easy to use kind of these pre-built elements in our applications. Let's go and have a look at the documentation to see sort of how it works. So all we need to do to actually install Bulma, this framework, is we can do it via npm install something. We can actually get it via a CDN straight in a CSS file, or we can clone it, or we can get it any number of ways. But what does this CSS library actually do? Well, let's go ahead and look at forms for a moment. And I'm just going to go to this general input here. Now, as we know, the form kind of inputs without any CSS are kind of boring. They look a little bit 90s, for want of a better word. But what Bulma does is it says, hey, if you go ahead and after downloading our code or kind of downloading it into your app, if you just add a class name to a div, a field, and then inside that you've got a label with a class of label, then inside that you've got a div with a class of control, and then an input with the class of input, well, your input boxes will look like this and your labels will look like this. So that's really good because it means that we don't have to go and do all of the minute kind of lines of CSS code to make really quite beautiful looking forms or elements. We can add multiple classes to certain things. So for example, this one here, control has, it's a control and it has icons left. So we're using, and it has an icon to the left. Also, it has icons right because we have this tick here. This is just my password manager that I've got installed on my computer, so don't worry about that too much. So what this does is it kind of speeds up development, because instead of us having to think, okay, I need to round the corners this much and I need to get this hex code for this specific input or whatever, we can just go ahead and add these class names. Now, of course, that does come with the payoff that when you use Bulma, your website will look like it is built using Bulma. So it is a bit of a payoff. If you've got a really uniquely designed website that needs, a really unique brand to it, then using CSS Framework is really not the right way to go. If you're working with a team of designers that's, maybe you're working at Apple or something like that, they will have their own frameworks that they use, but using kind of one of these off-the-shelf frameworks would not be a good idea. However, if you are trying to build a web app kind of quickly and you're trying to get it to market quickly, I would say that using a framework such as Bulma, and we'll look at a couple of others in a moment, would be a really good way to make sure that you're not spending unnecessary time on design. Of course, you can write your own CSS to go on top of this, but this gets you kind of 99% of the way there without having to write much code yourself. So it's not just forms and stuff that Bulma can help us with, or these frameworks can help us with. It also works helping us with layout. So let's have a look at columns, for example. So if we've got a website that requires columns of data, maybe we've got, sort of a recommendations or testimonials or something like that where we want columns. Well, it's already got that in there. We just need a div, give it a class of columns, and then give every column inside that a class of column. fantastic, and it will sort out all of the responsiveness for us. In fact, if we go down to responsiveness here, we can see that we've got is mobile, for example. And if I just go ahead and resize my browser, you'll see that they are responsive columns. And what this just means is that we're not spending all of that time testing as much, because we can take this kind of off-the-shelf solution and it will sort of work out of the box. Of course, that then comes with the payoff that if it doesn't work exactly the way that you want it to, you're probably going to have to write code on top of it to kind of make it work that way. So it is a swings and roundabouts situation. You know, what you gain on the swings, you lose on the roundabout. But I think that they're really handy. There are other frameworks, and I'm just going to look at a few of them here. Obviously, we've seen Bulmer. Another really popular one is one called Bootstrap. Now, you definitely will have used websites that are using Bootstrap. And, you know, the Bootstrap Manager website is actually built in Bootstrap. So let's have a look at the docs here. Well, actually, let's have a look at some examples. So let's have a look at, so we've got a headers snippets that we can go ahead and say, if we want our website header, we can go ahead and basically just copy this code here and it will look like that. You know, we can go ahead and make it look like this. Really, really easy, just by adding the right class names to our elements. Again, there's this other one called Semantic UI. I think this one's quite a nice one. I've not used it a lot myself, but I've seen other people using it as well. And this is another really nice kind of simple website builder. This is a really nice kind of simple framework that you can, CSS framework that you can use. Again, you will always be able to see that websites were built with these frameworks, but it does mean that you can get these things designed really, really quickly. The one that we're going to be using in the rest of this unit is Bulmer, because it's nice and simple, it looks great, and all of the things that you learn using Bulmer, you'll be able to apply to all of the other frameworks as well. We'll be coming back to the documentation a lot, and one of the great things about Bulmer, especially in a learning environment, the documentation is really well written. Unfortunately, some of the other ones aren't so well written. Bootstraps is great. Semantic UI, I think, is okay. You know, there's some bits that it's lacking, and there's others out there. So we're going to be focusing on Bulmer, but just know that if you learn one, you can use all of them.